What is so incredible, Eric, about these episodes is not that they're duo episodes. I mean, people are already probably excited as soon as they heard that magical word, duo. But typically, when a podcast that normally features guests has a duo
Mm.
episode, it likely means that the guest couldn't make it. Oh man, we were supposed to have ABC, they couldn't make it. Well, we'll string something together. But we're kind of different where we cancel people just so we can have duo episodes. Like we invite people on, and then just like 5 minutes before, myself and Eric are talking. Like, you want to nix this, bro? You want to just do a duo episode? We're like, yeah, let's do it. So we actually cancel guests to have duo episodes.
It's a power play. So what we do is we kind of, the saying, aim for the stars, and if you hit the moon, you'll be ecstatic or happy or whatever it is. So what we do is we come up with a list of people who would probably say no to Iron Culture.
Yeah.
And we can, that's a long list.
Yeah.
And then we send it out to all of them. And when we get a yes, we line it up, and then we go from the top and cancel them to make ourselves feel more powerful. I think I'll just go ahead and say it, and then we have our episode. So sorry, Arnold. You didn't make this one. Appreciate you saying yes. And we just don't need that kind of opportunity here at Iron Culture. We got this.
Yeah, I just feel lately with some of the moves he's been making that his brand doesn't align with Iron Culture. We're kind of about asserting dominance, and I don't know, man. Ever since Terminator 3, and Terminator 3 was questionable, we just don't want that smoke on our podcast. This is a family friendly podcast that is also a cult. And if you're not willing to drink that Kool-Aid, what are you doing?
Yeah, also with that whole it's either me or Stallone thing, I was like, you know what? How about neither one of you, and we do a duo episode?
Yeah. Which brings
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, between the choice, Arnold or Stallone, the answer is Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport. Because those high kicks, Eric, flexibility, my friend.
Child, man, and okay, kickboxer. Not to mention the completely accurate representation of Guile. From Street Fighter, I mean,
completely
same
accurate.
hair,
same
perfect
accent,
rugged American accent, yeah exactly,
rugged, Eric, it was weird. Did you know? So Eric, you'll probably be surprised by this, but did you know that John actually has an accent, and so he had to learn an American accent for that movie, but you can't tell.
You know what? There are a few great method actors of our time, and the real best method actors are the ones where you did not even know they were a method actor. Because I actually thought that I was like, was Jean-Claude Van Damme actually in the U.S. Air Force as a flip kick specialist? I mean, having been in the Air Force, that's not one of the AFSCs I ever got the choice to make. That this wasn't on the career list, but perhaps I didn't score high enough on the initial entrance exam, PT exam, or whatever it might have been. It was a different time, and I legitimately thought that he was probably Special Forces in the Air Force in a secret division. So yeah, the fact that wasn't just him playing, a time in his life out, it's still shocked to this day.
Yeah, and Eric, let me just say that I love the range of his acting and the roles that he chooses, because critics might say that typically he chooses the role where he's the hero, the unsung hero that has to enter some sort of secret martial arts competition that's not known to the outside world but has a lot of prestige inside the martial art discipline. He is the underdog. He has to overcome adversity, and eventually he wins. People could say that's basically all his movies, but they clearly haven't seen the classic Double Team, which is what I would describe us, or our first probably adult feature.
I'm going to let you slide in this one, but it's Double Impact.
Ooh,
which is fine.
Yep.
Yeah, and
I was thinking of Double Team, Eric.
They also didn't see the cyberpunk noir thriller Cyborg, which he was in.
Yeah.
Time
Cop.
You also have to give a lot of Time Cop, which I thought was probably an accurate representation of our best understanding of if it is possible to actually do, time travel in the current. I mean, honestly, the physics were actually ahead of its time. I heard Interstellar actually had to take a fair amount from Time Cop to do what they did. So Kip Thorne was referenced for Interstellar, but like Christopher Nolan, sometimes you don't want to reference the inspiration that's closest to you for fear of being labeled an imitator, a copycat, right? So obviously, JCVD
real close to his heart. And maybe, you know what? I don't understand why people say there's kind of a latent homoerotic aspect to the podcast where I said double team. I was just thinking of duo episodes, Eric. And I was thinking about
Hmm.
us going through our journey when you said kind of almost not a man out of time, but it was a different time period where for some listeners out there in these woods, in these streets, they might be only
Streets.
in these streets. They might only be a year into the lifting journey, a couple years. We have over a decade of lifting experience. Now, the quality of that, remains to be seen. But there is so much more to lifting, to be serious for a second, than crunching the numbers, which is very important. You want to know what you're doing. You want to make sure you're taking likely the most intelligent approach or a way you're pursuing a path that is the path of least resistance. You don't want to make this journey any harder on yourself than it needs to be. Okay, so a dreamer bulk, I don't know about that, but there's the underrated component of doing the damn thing, walking the walk, the cultural aspect of participating in lifting culture. And you and myself, my friend, have that decade of experience. So I think it'd be nice to go take a trip down memory lane and go down the various experiences we've had that have helped make us into the lifters and people see before them today.
No, 100%. I think there's a couple of archetypal things we make fun of in the evidence-based community that are encapsulated in this, but I don't think perfectly describe it. Like the person who is so analytical that they get paralysis by analysis. They're trying to create something optimal, but they never actually move forward. And ironically, they're actually afraid of doing it wrong. And then, of course, the cliche but incredibly true statement that you learn more from failure than success, and that if you accumulate a lot of you can label them as failures, but I'm going to label it as learning experiences early on. That means you're going to have much more information as to what does work or what might be the next pathway to take or how to overcome obstacles later in your experience. And I don't just mean like, hey, Omar and I are going to justify all the dumb stuff we did in our early 20s and how it was good that I tore my hamstring or anything like that, but more so, I think sometimes we focus so much on getting that Excel spreadsheet perfect that we neglect to discuss some of the qualitative aspects of lifting and some of the true experiential knowledge rather than the rote memorization of facts and systems. And I think that's something that if you get a bunch of lifters together, that's what they primarily talk about, or they connect over, or they bond over. But for some reason, once we put it online and we throw that evidence-based label on it, a lot of it falls by the wayside, I think, to the detriment of people who follow it.
So well put, Eric. And let me just say, that's where I really knew. So when I invited you many moons ago, almost 2 years ago now, to Toronto and we did the damn thing, I knew I had a brother in lifting when I saw how you lifted, because actually at the upper echelon of all the collabs I've had throughout the years in terms of training intensity not being defined as the percentage of your one rep max, but the effort that you put forth in the gym. And again, that's not just rated via RPE, but it could be something as simple as the contraction that you're focusing on. So I'll give you an example. Alberto Nunez, you and Alberto are actually right at the top. It kind of is no surprise that you both have fantastic physiques, that you guys get along, that probably is, I could only imagine as training partners what a great time it must have been. Because again, when I say intensity or when I say effort, it extends beyond the number on the bar or it extends beyond the rep range. It is simple things like Alberto well resting in between sets where he's not on his phone. He's kind of just in the zone. Like we had an hour to spare between filming for a project we're working with Alberto on, and you are incredibly similar to this. Not on his phone, kind of just in the zone. And we had an hour. He's like, you know what? I'm going to train. And he put forth an intense training session. Again, he wasn't working up to a one rep max, but when he was doing a bicep curl, I could see the intent in his face where it's like, okay, peak contraction here. Like every rep, there were no junk reps. And I would say the same idea, Eric, training with you, where we got after, remember, we're filming, and then in between, it's like, oh man, let's do a deadlift session. And that was at the time where I had a little bit of that sports hernia, and we were able to get a very good training session. I remember even like the straight arm pull downs, all the various things that we did. And so I think people that go through that passage, and we spoke about that previously, last episode with, John Meadows, Chris Bumstead, and Paul Ravella, where there's almost that rite of passage where they've competed so often and so many times there's almost a humility or level of understanding the experiential knowledge that you said, Eric. Until you go through it, you won't understand it. And we could try and quantify, we could try and verbally describe it, we could try and write articles about it, but there is that qualitative difference from going through it. And you could kind of, when you said someone stepping on stage in the previous episode, Eric, you said, oh, I could just tell, like, that person, photos might not do it justice, but as a judge, as someone that participates in this sport, in this art form, that guy right there, he stands out. It's like you can kind of just see by the way someone lifts. And again, it's not just being defined as the percentage of the one rep max or their RPE level, just everything about them. I'm going to say something silly, even how sometimes an individual laces up their shoes prior to lifting. And I'm not being like how it's like 1 foot down, kind of like headphones on, like it's go time. It's kind of the ritual. I think those things are more important than people realize. So I'm thrilled to participate with you in this episode, all about, a journey through our lifting experience.
Yeah, I think you said it well there. First, thank you, because you gave me some compliments there, and I appreciate that. And that's certainly something I try to bring when I train. But I don't try to bring it to try to be a part of something, or I don't try to bring that because I want to get acknowledgement for it. I think what you discussed, and one of the words you used was intent. And I think intentionality, it speaks to the connection of lifting to a goal that is important to the person. And they've been able to, through trial and error, the process, and being able to have truly what I think is delayed gratification, achieving these long-term goals, you start connecting all of these small behaviors and the way you operate when you're doing it to that place you're trying to get. And I think I went through so many years of trying to turn over every single stone because of how important my goal was to me, that I approach anything in my mind that slots into the domain of lifting or getting better at my sports of choice or my passion or however I'm defining it at that time, that there's intentionality to all those little things. So when I'm like lacing up my deadlift shoes and I put the Velcro strap on, I know that if I put it too tight, it'll just pop off and that'll distract me mid-set. So I actually put it midway across, and that's something I think about. And there's a lot of little things like that, and it's not necessarily OCD. It's just that I'm present when I'm training. And because I started lifting pre-social media, once social media became a big part of my life and my job and my mission statement of communicating science and information and all the stuff that we talk about in Iron Culture, I have been the guy who started bringing his phone to the gym, started being distracted, and immediately saw that all those little things started falling away. And that's why now, if I'm on my phone in the gym, it's because I'm tracking on Gravitas, filming my set, or making some note about something. But it's on airplane mode otherwise, besides that for me, for exactly those reasons.
Hey, quick unaffiliated shout out I have to give to that app. I think Gravitas is a fantastic lifting app to track your workouts. I just want to give that shout out. If people are looking for an app to track their workouts, shout out to Gravitas. Not pay to say it. I do want to say, Eric, we want to trade stories now, maybe kick it off, because I like where this is going. And maybe, I'll share a story, you share a story, we comment on it. I think it'd be fun maybe to open up with the nutrition aspect, because I think we have a lot of similarities, right? Where we weren't overweight growing up. Right? I was a skinny kid. Okay. I was an athletic kid. I had for a long period of time, just like your resting six pack, like just chilling. And when I started lifting, I started reading, of course, the articles that I could find online. And the articles that you could find online, shout out to T Nation, where I was reading John Berardi, who we had as a guest, massive eating. And so John Berardi was a very skinny child growing up. Cool. And he wrote about how he needed to gain weight. He was habitually under eating, so he would eat 4,000 or 5,000 calories. And how he met, once again, a lifter, a bodybuilder, which is, once again, one of those interesting elements I find of the old school rite of passage, where one of my first lifting partners was the guy nicknamed the Gladiator. That was a former football player. Ian, that then like kind of did some bodybuilding, where they're like some of the most friendly guys, where it's like, oh, you train hard? Yeah. Hey, lift with me. I'm like, I'm 140 pounds right now. This is awesome. Like, you're front squatting 3 plates and change. So I try to read everything I could when it came to lifting. Had a prior athletic background. My brother helped me out, where he took a year, he did phys ed. And so he learned a little bit about lifting before I went away to university. I was able to basically do a bench press, a squat, and a deadlift somewhat, so I wasn't completely clueless. But I get to the gym and I understand immediately from that point forth, one of the major stepping stones or hurdles I have to overcome is eating more. And so when I was speaking, because I liked the training intensity, I took a look at the gym and I saw, Eric, that there were the bodybuilding bros. So when I say bodybuilding bros, I don't mean true bodybuilders, but I mean individuals with more like, chest, biceps, Friday, Saturday, train the upper body more. That's what's up. They care about benching and they care about doing curls. No judgment, but I saw that. I'm like, okay. Then I saw these dudes getting after, squatting. There's this thing called the jammer, which is this horizontal kind of machine press that simulates or kind of simulates a football exercise. I thought, this is cool. And from speaking with some of them, all of them, when I spoke to them, it's like, oh man, you need to gain some. Like, if you want to get bigger, you got to gain some weight. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. How much? They say 10 pounds. Like 10. I'm like, oh yeah, 10 pounds a month. Like 8 to 10 pounds a month was the general guideline. We're talking about linemen here, Eric, that are around 300 pounds. Again, no judgment, but that's a lot of weight on a boy. And so I think to myself, no problem. There's no obstacles because I have all I have, and people complain all the time about university, about the coursework. It's 13 hours of actual in-school time. If you pay attention in class, your homework's minimized. At most, plus homework, I was doing a double major economics, quantitative economics, is maybe add double that if you want to get real fancy. So 26 hours. Maybe. We got 168 hours in the week. I'm living with my aunt. I'm going to the University of Windsor. I got a lot of free time. I'm training. So I was doing the damn thing. I was training, but I made it a point to try and eat enough. And this is where the story comes in, where bless my aunt, retired principal, just enjoying her best life, probably eating honestly like 1,000 calories a day because she's a petite person. So in comes her nephew, now living with her. And I'm like, yo, I say to my aunt, I said, I got to eat ABC. Like I'm trying to calculate the calories roughly. And so blocks of cheese, I'd go through 3 blocks of cheese on a weekly basis because I was trying to go, I was budgeting. I was fortunate at a scholarship and I had OSAP. So I had a government loan that I had to pay back a portion, but not pay back a portion. I had enough left over to consume, let's say, a decent amount of food, but I still had a budget thing. So protein powder, I saw that, Eric, it was expensive. I came up with a few things, and shout out to John Berardi, his chili from his massive eating article, JB's Chili, it's called, and anyone can look up the recipe. Pretty standard, but you were able to make 10 servings at once. And that, for me, from a time efficiency standpoint, I'm like, oh, this is right on the nose. And so, bless my aunt, we're talking about a 100-pound individual, like 5'2", something like that, with a spatula, Eric, that is probably half her size because she's making, we're talking now 10 servings. So it's probably, honestly, it's probably 20 pounds of chili. It was in a ginormous pot. I'm talking the pot's at least 18 inches high. So it's this big thing. And on Saturday morning, bless her, she would help me. She would get up and I would just see like her head underneath the pot and her hand over, stirring this thing with like 2 hands, just using all her might. Cool. So we would make this chili. And I would take it to school because I'd go to school, I'd do the classwork, I'd take my laptop with me, and then I'd come home. I'd train and I'd come home. So it's like an 8-hour day or 10-hour day, whatever. I would pack the chili in my bag. And so this is before, we're saving them dollar bills. We're being let's say from a money standpoint, very conscious every dollar we spend. Nothing was being eaten out. We were instead just shopping and bringing our food. So I had the melted cheese sandwiches, melted tuna sandwiches. They're 6 hours resting in your bag. They're room temperature, with that mayo. But I ate every single one of those. But the chili was the one, Eric, where I would pack it in a thermos and I'd take it with me. Big ass thermos, 2 of them. Anyways, I'm on the bus. The bus takes an hour to get to the gym, to get to the university from where my aunt lives. Cool. I'm reading my War and Peace. I'm reading Tolstoy. I'm connecting. Do my thing. I'm sloshing around with the bag. And this happened on more than one occasion. You think you would learn, but this is the story. I'm carrying this ginormous flask. And sometimes heading to the school, because I had to get my calories in, I'd bust out that flask and I'd have a little bit, okay? I oftentimes would be to the point of almost throwing up when I'd be eating my food. Okay. So I eat a little bit, then I tighten the thermos. The thing is, this thermos, Eric, was a dollar store thermos and was not prepared for 2 pounds of chili inside of it. I got all my coursework inside that bag. All my stuff, all the meticulous notes, my laptop.
Oh, no.
And I get out of the bus and I start walking. And just the way I sloshed my bag, it kind of just exploded the thermos. Unbeknownst to me, I'm in the middle of, I think it was statistics, like just one of the classes learning, and I'm smelling I'm smelling chili hard. And I open up the bag, and Eric, it looks like a crime scene inside my bag. Now, here's the story. Now, here's the real story. I went and I got a bowl, and I put the majority of that chili in said bowl, got a spoon, and finished the damn thing. Wasn't even that disturbed by the textbooks, which I had to replace some of them because they just got absolutely torched, or the coursework, which I would have to repeat. I'm like, whatever, this course is easy, who cares? It was the thought in my head, how I knew I was about this life. The thought in my head, Eric, was, oh man, like that's like 1,000 calories or like 1,200 calories. I wonder how I'm gonna make that up now, because like even if I put some of this in the bowl, I'm probably like, what? That's 70% of it. Oh, I'm gonna have to eat something when I get home. That was the thing I was most disturbed about. So that's my opening story.
Catching up. The backpack chili wasn't enough.
Yep.
Who cares if I've destroyed a week worth of homework?
Yeah.
I'm eating backpack chili. I'm eating that Jan Sport brand chili.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's
it.
my opening story, my man.
Man, I don't even know if I want to say my nutrition story, because there is a YouTube video that I did with you, when I was in Toronto, and we discussed cooking. And I can one up this story, but I also worry that I will be looked at differently.
Dude,
forever.
Eric, it's a judgment-free zone, and I think you've told me the gist of the story, or no? Does it get deeper than what we're going to talk about with the chicken?
I mean, it's the same. No, not the chicken, dude. No, no, you're forgetting. When we made our cooking video, I discussed my most. You know what I'm talking about now?
Yeah. Eric, sure. Go for it, buddy.
All right. Yeah. So let me just say, this was in 2005, either late 2005 or early 2006, and I was all in. I was literally thinking, I remember actually saying this out loud to people. They were asking me, like, someone who's totally uninitiated in the sport or what I'm doing or whatever. Not that I was actually competing yet. I had not even done my first powerlifting meet, which was in '06. And they're like, so why, you're so dedicated. You're always like, you train hard, you do all this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, and of course I ate it up as a 21-year-old or whatever I was. And I was like, well, it's an easy thing. I just think about every decision I make in life, and I think, does this help or hurt my bodybuilding goals? And of course, that's not the way life works, but that is the way life worked in my brain at this time.
Yeah.
So I was a personal trainer at the time, and my first clients, as is standard, would start around 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. And I, like you, started out as a skinny kid. I was 6 foot, between 165 to 175, and I had to eat a lot in my early 20s to get into the numbers that started with 2. Did I have any business being in that body weight range? Of course not. But that was where you needed to be, and I was 6 foot, and people told me that it didn't matter that I had a small bone structure or that I was just getting fat or whatever, and I was always skinny, so I didn't have any conception that weight I could gain could actually be body fat. So nonetheless, I did get up to the heaviest of around 220 before I ever started competing. I had a contest rebound that got heavier than that, but 220 was the heaviest I was able to ever get myself, and that took some dedication and work, and that was, I think, I'm talking 60 pounds on top of my lightest weight, maybe 50. So anyway, my diet, just to kind of give people some context here, every morning I would get up and I would have an oats, peanut butter, milk, and whey shake. That was around 600, 800 calories, because then I knew that I wouldn't be able to eat because I'd be training clients until that kind of morning break. And then typically for lunch, I would go to, I can't remember the name of the place, but it's this place that was like a Musclehead's Jamba Juice at the time. And there's a place called Barbaritos, which was basically like Chipotle. Mm-hmm. So I would get the full-size Chipotle burrito, which is around 1,000 calories, as you know. And then I go next door to this shake place, and I get the shake called the Gladiator, which was basically peanut butter, sugar, and whey. And again, it was also around 600, 800 calories. So my lunch would be close to 2,000 calories. And then I would train some more clients, and at my break, I would go to, I think, Wendy's. They had a grilled chicken sandwich, and I would get that, and it was around 500 calories. And I would also bring like tuna or cooked chicken that I'd munch on throughout the day. And then I'd go home or go out to eat with my wife, and I would eat a full meal and hers as well. And then I'd have a pint of Ben & Jerry's before bed. And that was every day for most of that year. And that was, we're talking 6,000 or 7,000 calories. And it worked. However, I knew that I couldn't get behind my eating schedule. So, couple things to consider. Of course, I was also taking one of these ridiculous bodybuilding multivitamins that was, the size of a golf ball that I basically had to choke down like some kind of anaconda. And if I took that on an empty stomach, and I had experienced this before, it made me super nauseous and I'd actually throw up. So I knew that I had to drink my shake first and then take my multivitamin. And I had limited time. I had to get up, go. I was waking up around 5:30 a.m. at the earliest to then train. An hour later after getting dressed and all that stuff. So, I'm half awake, and this one morning I get up and I'm getting all my stuff out for my shake. I'm getting ready, and I get a glass of water because I'm thirsty, and I go, I'll just take my multivitamin. I take my multivitamin, I start to make my shake, and then I go, oh no, I just took my multivitamin first. What have I done? Then I started to feel a little nauseous, and I was like, no, I can get this. I just need to get something down real quick. So I have an apple, and I just eat through this apple light speed, and I'm like, all right, I'm good. And I go about it. I start making my shake, and I'm like, yeah, this is fine. This is all good. And I drink my shake, and I'm starting to feel the stomach rumblings. And like you thought, like, oh no, that was 1,000 calories that I just, lost. I have to make this up. I'm thinking, I don't have time. Like, if I don't eat this, I'll be in a deficit to this day. And tomorrow, I won't be able to bench one plate. Everything will be gone. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I got to leave in 10 minutes. I'm okay. I'm actually going to throw up. And I was like, well, it's only been in my stomach for a little bit. It's not that well digested. This is going to be gross, but this is going to be worth it. So I grab a big plastic bowl. And when I throw up, I just put it right back in the shaker, blend it a little bit, and drink it again. And the only difference was it had a nice apple crisp flavor, and it was a little warm. And I didn't think anything of it. And then when I told my wife the next day, I think she regretted the fact that she was my wife.
It's a new experience, and she didn't know the struggle you were going through, Eric, is what I think. The level of dedication. And if I was her, what I think to myself is, this is a dedicated man. Okay, that's what I would think personally.
I don't think she thought that.
Okay.
I think she probably thought that I had an unhealthy relationship with my goals. What one person's unhealthy is another person's vomit drink induced gains.
Yeah.
So I mean, I didn't see a problem with it at the time. Now I look back and I go, yeah, I had the seeds of something that would need to be dealt with later in life, and might even, I don't know, be the impetus of this obsessive personality to actually start maybe a whole business around helping people overcome that, to have a better relationship with the sport. So hey, look, it's a positive. So don't judge me, all right? I'm here to help you not drink your own vomit, okay? That's what I'm here for.
I drank the vomit so you won't have to.
Exactly.
I do want to say, before we keep trading stories, I do think it's interesting, Eric, when you're in group. So if you're talking with a bunch of bodybuilders, I think we were sharing stories somewhere, and it wasn't that story, but it was something, let's say to an outsider, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. But everyone seated around the table were kind of just nodding their head, because it's in group. People understand that level of obsession or dedication that you have. I remember the guy incorrectly assumed, because I was always there lifting at this gym, maybe he just wanted to share his, and this is another level. I would say this gets towards disordered eating. So that is different. I would say
yes.
you're obsessed with your goal, and you're thinking pragmatically in your head with your constraints as you understand them, that there are, feeding windows, let's say. And if you're 1,000 calories under for the day, that means next day you can't make it up, and it's going to directly impact your performance in the gym, which, as we know right now, us benching a plate and a half, them's the breaks. That's tough.
I had some false assumptions, and but about the consequences of not getting in those 800 calories. But indeed, I wouldn't have been able to get them in because I was eating as much as I could in each one of these feeding windows, given the time I had. So it was a logical yet disgusting informed choice that I made as I'm going to say adult in terms of age. I'm not going to necessarily imply that I had adult levels of reasoning or emotional intelligence, but hey,
yeah.
I fit the bill on paper as an 18-year-old plus individual.
Yeah. As when you get to be 12 plus, we all make choices. It's like, what? Eric, I'll say this guy. So this is a tangent, and we'll keep trading. And I want to get it to, let's say, PR attempts, and then after that, some accomplishments that we're proud of, maybe, or just some actual, adversity that we went through that was a true learning experience. But speaking of just food or eating habits, or why I'm thankful we had Jake Lenardin on to talk a little bit about disordered eating. Sometimes people assume oh, you're in the same group as me, where there's a bodybuilder, or maybe he just wanted to share a story. Maybe he was lonely at a gym I used to go to before Fortis Fitness. And the short summary is that this individual won the Canada Cup, and his if he wants to highlight his level of dedication, and he thinks there's nothing wrong with it, with this story, is that in his final few weeks of the prep, what he would do, he would go to a burger joint because he couldn't eat burgers. He was one of those guys. You have your 6 to 8 foods. Those are the foods you got to eat. Blah 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 blah. Clean foods versus junk food. Cool. And so he would buy burgers, and told me this, and he had he had a freakish intensity to his eyes that made you uncomfortable staring directly at them. Where it's like he stared into the abyss, like in a way that is so unnecessary for a chosen goal. It's like, I am so about trying to win this, participation award. I will do anything. I'm like, okay, it's a participation award. He's like, no, 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 it's the Canada Cup, my friend. That he would buy,
Big deal.
He would buy cheeseburgers, Eric, chew them in his mouth, and then spit them out. And he would do this on a regular basis. And he said, I had a moment, Omar, when I thought I had the food in my mouth, I chewed it, that I was going to eat it. And I thought in my head, and I'm not going to yell because he started getting excited. It's like, is this what you want? And he was just getting really animated. Like it's do or die time. And I spat it out. And then I competed 2 weeks later and I won. I was like, I was in between my deadlift sets. Cool, man. But that's just one of those stories where you think it's like, I don't know what he thought I was going to say. Like, oh, that was amazing. But in my head, I was thinking, that doesn't sound right.
You probably shouldn't have. I mean, there's an issue there. Yeah. I mean, I've as a coach and athlete, I can understand it.
Right.
It's not good, but I can understand.
Yeah. Just that, as you said, experiential difference that occurs where, as an outsider, it's like, man, you haven't gone through prep. You don't know the type of hunger that you experience, the things, because this goal becomes so important to you that you're willing to do. And that to an outsider, maybe that's one of the overarching goals with our stories here is that, maybe we're looking for acceptance. I'm joking, but people can hear these stories and they can relate, or they think to themselves, "Oh, wait, I've done some stuff, but I've never thrown up in a cup and swallowed it." It's like, or
bowl,
yeah,
a bowl.
I apologize.
Totally different.
Yeah. Please don't demean me like that, or my choices, Eric.
This is not one Eric, one cup. Okay,
No.
this is a bowl.
But the fact is, you only need one Eric. You don't need two people, and I think that's a statement in and of itself.
Yes, I can do the reconsumption of food of two people in one man.
My man.
It's a superpower.
The next one I want to share then is just maybe the ego that sometimes, and we've spoken about this before, and I'm not going to say the guests we want to have on because we've spoken off camera, but sometimes it's important to kind of feed the ego or feed those demons and really push the pedal to the metal where you sometimes have goals and they're seemingly insurmountable and you need to get into another place. And so I think it is an underrated component when people, we do talk about these things and we want to give context and we want to give a framework so people can understand. We talk about percentages, we talk about RPE. There is a time and place, I'm not saying always, where some of that, let's call it the next level that you and myself understand, Eric, can be beneficial. And there's other times where you're listening too much to that ego. And one of the times for myself, and I should have known this, is that in my first year, so when people ask, I don't think your beginner progress is necessarily, unless you're an extreme outlier, like, oh, I just picked up a weight, like first time I deadlifted was 405. I'm like, I think you're going to be pretty good at this thing. But people ask about like your progress that you make when you first start out, blah, blah, blah. And so I started from like barely, benching like 65 pounds maybe to like by the end of the first 8-month period, it was like maybe 265 for a single. And then on the deadlift, it was like 365, 375. On the squat, Eric, this is where it gets interesting. I shit you not. I loaded up 365 in that same time frame. And I, in quotations, I squatted it. But it is highly, the depth, I'm not even talking about parallel. Did I half squat it? I don't know. All I know, it felt heavy on my back and I was dedicated. But after I went away and I came back, I decided, I want to squat to proper depth now, like, because I understand it a little bit more. I was noticing more people lifting, and at the gym away from the university, there was a mirror, so I could kind of see myself. I'm like, I don't think this looks low enough. Like, you have that come to Jesus moment where you have to be real with yourself. It's like, God, I'm lifting a lot of weight, but these reps are shit, and like it takes a while for you to own that. But I decided then to go back. I went back to the university after having a little bit of a break, and I was going to squat to depth. Okay, so I went from 365, right? And I noticed this. I tend to notice this in beginners. If they'll list like their numbers and whatever, it's bench 185, deadlift, I don't know, 275, squat 380. I'm like, I don't, like, it's possible.
That's a high squat.
Yeah. In both ways. We mean it in both ways. And so for myself, I thought, I will start with something light, Eric. let me go for 225, well below parallel. Because I was doing 365. If we basically put this thing in half, it's what, like, I'm going to rep this thing out. But to be safe, because there were no power racks, this is, circa over a decade ago now at the gym. My buddy, who got the nickname Holy Diver from me from this story, Kyle Essery, shout out to him, who's still a personal trainer. He was part of the football team, great guy. And so what happened is the song started because I was working there as a trainer. He was working there. We had our buddies working there. We were put on, I forget the name of the Detroit radio station, but basically was kind of a rock metal station. And so when we lift, we jack it up a little bit. There's the cardio section that wasn't too pleased about us playing this music, but Kyle turns it on for the PR. He's like, I got you, bro. Turns it on. I ask him for a spot because we don't have a power rack. It's one of those like half racks. We have to walk outside of it because if you want to squat to depth, you're probably going to clip either side. So you got to like freestanding squat this thing. Okay. If you want to squat it proper. But Kyle turns on the radio and Dio's Holy Diver bump, 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 bump starts playing. And Dio's like operatic voice was like, ooh, it starts singing. Cool. So the mood is set. And I look at Kyle, and Kyle's one of those guys you want, and you know the people, Eric. When you're going for a PR attempt, he's not just yelling platitudes at you, but like he believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Like you look in his eyes and he's like, let's go, bro. So I got the 225 and I'm just I'm enjoying lifting. I'm thinking to myself, okay. I'm thinking in my head, let's go for 10. Okay. And so I unrack it, music's blaring, Dio's rocking, Cal has that demon look in his eyes. And he spots me. This is the most unique spot because this is before standardized experiences. The internet, lifting videos on the internet weren't really a thing. You had only your own subjective experience and those of your friends to dictate how you do things. And the way he spotted was called the seatbelt spot. And I'm not joking when I say this, Eric. So he would horizontally with one hand put it over my waist, and then the other hand, he would lock it behind. So it'd be like this, and he would lock it vertically on one side. So he chose my right side, so it was up on my pec, my shoulder, and then my waist. So never mind my left side. It's all good. I'm locked. Eric, it's a seatbelt.
He saved your life. He saved your life and prevented whiplash. So I think we need to be actually reconsidering this as standard practice.
Yeah, I think we need to evaluate how individuals spot each other. So I'm locked and loaded. Now he's not actually applying pressure yet, but he is right there with me. So I take my breath in. And I think 10 reps. And I squat down, Eric, and no joke. So I did squat quite low because I'm like, I'm just going to sink this thing. It's half the weight. I was so wobbly and I lost my balance that I went to fall backwards. And that's when Holy Diver, Kyle Essery, jumped in, like left arm, right arm, locked in. And he squatted me up and the entire weight up. And he just said, I got you, bro. And squatted me up. And then we racked it. And it turned a potentially disastrous situation of just like completely failing with two plates, it falling behind me cracking my head, all those things, to Kyle just having my back. And I have to give a shout out to that sense of camaraderie and where he was so invested. There was no, like, maybe some people were watching. He wasn't like, I'm going to look cool in the gym. He's like, my dude is lifting. I'm going to be there for him. And so I have him to thank. And it was a nice slice of humble pie I very necessarily needed in order to progress in my lifting journey.
I love it. And I think, Omar, one day you will hit that 2-plate squat to depth. So
I don't know. I don't want to set expectations to receive disappointments, Eric. So let's just say I'll keep squatting and whatever happens, happens.
I like that attitude. I think that's that process-oriented perspective you have from these types of experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I totally, completely understand and respect that. I remember the same thing. I thought I could squat 405 about a year and a half into my training. And then we had the YMCA, like in-house powerlifting meet come up. And a bunch of us trainers were going to do it. And pretty quickly, the organizer, who was like the head of training, decided to just make it a push-pull, just a squat. So just a bench deadlift. And I was really relieved because every time I refused to not do 405, and I could do 405 to like respectable non-meat depth, like kind of like parallel-ish, but slightly higher. But I was unable to take the weight down. And I just couldn't do it. Like I've squatted 405. There are certain thresholds. Like if I was at 335, I could have gone to 315. If I was at 350, I could have done 320 because those are reasonable jumps. But I had a threshold. A 405 squat in 2006, you were strong. People were thinking, what is he taking? is that just creatine? No one can squat no one can squat 1.8 times body weight.
Yeah.
At this time. So I was quite relieved that it was going to be a push pull because touching my chest on bench, that was something I was doing. A deadlift, it wasn't pretty, but it started on the ground and it finished with me standing up. But yeah, just like that, the squat, where the subjectiveness allows the ego to creep in, was a place for me that I just couldn't walk it back at that point. And I was aware, much like I was, looking back, especially when I saw the reaction on my wife's face with the shake in the bowl and the apple and the multivitamin scenario, that maybe there was something I should look at deeper here and address, just for my own sanity in the future. And what you were introing with before I share a story, how you need to be able to go there. You need to have that willingness to do something that is, by all accounts, probably not intelligent or safe in certain moments. I think there's a big difference between having that ability and then having that be the person driving the bus. I think if we're all honest, sometimes our internal dialogue is very schizophrenic, and that there's like 4 or 5 or 6 versions of us that we talk to, and that's at least how I envision and how I even sometimes negotiate or compromise with different aspects of my personality with making things okay. And I've quite literally conceptualized and done imagery to think of the part of me that used to drive the bus, sometimes straight off cliffs, but towards the goal. We can make this jump. Like, this isn't speed, Eric. That's a cliff, and this is a bus. It's gonna fall off. I got this.
You're more Dennis Hopper than Keanu Reeves in that moment.
100%. And really, I just wanted to be the guy who Keanu Reeves called Gigantor, in process of that. So anyway, so point being, the bus driver, the only personality I had when it came time to lifting related goals, was the get it done at all cost person. But eventually, I was able to get to the point from the negative experiences of this person never taking their foot off the gas, of envisioning this person like this kind of warrior, this part of me that was, when recruited, when called upon, when activated, this warrior Helms or whatever it is would do whatever was necessary, and would not stop no matter what. And that's obviously bad in certain scenarios, not stopping no matter what, doing whatever's quote unquote necessary. If maybe the goal isn't ideal, or if maybe right now is just training, you're not competing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can think of many examples. But once I gained the ability to play that card when I, the actual adult driving the bus, was able to dictate, and I thought it was a good idea, that became an instrumental step towards success for me. But I think it's when ego or competition, or when you place an inappropriate level of importance, like, I'm 24 weeks out from my powerlifting meet, but this is an intensity block, or this is a testing session, and in my brain I can squat X number, but I'm not quite there yet, so I will kill myself and sniff ammonia on my pre-test 1RMs just so that I can be the guy who squats X number. That's when it's problematic, right? So anyway, one of these times before I had the ability to, get this person to drive the bus when I wanted, not just always having his foot on the gas, was when we had what we called the 50 rep challenge, which is something that I used to do with Alberto, my old training partner, and rest in peace, his friend and my friend Levi, who we also trained with. And really, really strong guy. These guys were both way stronger than me. They were both, I think Berto was benching over 3 plates at the time. Levi was in the low 300s, and I was just about a 300-pound bench, not quite 3 plates. Deadlift, I was in the high 400s, and they were both, Berto was similar max, but much better at reps, and then Levi was right around a 500-pound deadlift. And anyway, so we were doing the 50 rep challenge with 315 on deadlifts. So at the time, we had to see whoever could get to 50 reps faster, multiple sets or whatever. Okay. And you had a maximum of 4 sets. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to beat these guys, but I wanted to get my 50 reps. So I paced myself. I was pulling conventional at the time. I just played around a little bit with sumo, but I was on my 4th set, and I'd gotten to, I think I did like 12, 11, 10 or something like that. So I was about 8 reps away, but I could only get 5 on that last set, and I had another 3 or 4 to do. But I mean, we're talking I hit an RPE 10 on the rep right before it.
You're done.
And I tried, yeah, I was done. And I tried 3 times conventional and 3 times sumo. And each time the range of motion was getting less. Until the last one, it came just off the ground. And if you think you've ever seen a cat that is really scared, that was nowhere near the level of spinal flexion I had. I mean, I wish I would have had the barbell medicine folks to have my back at that time to say, you know what, his back is not going to explode. Technique is not what immediately causes injury. And I didn't get hurt that time,
Yep.
and so that was good. But man, for whatever reason, getting that 50 rep challenge sometime in my 2007 off season, a year and a half before I would compete again, that was everything to me. And I hit 5 RPE 10.5 to 11 attempts on a deadlift of 315. Looking like I was trying to mark my territory as a cat spraying behind himself. And yeah.
Eric,
How's that?
just showing dominance in the gym. And it's, look, we all do it in different ways. And what I like about that, and see, some people might be listening to some of these things. It's like, oh man, when you get like-minded individuals around you, that's when something dangerous can happen. And yes, you are right, certainly in ways, but I want to maybe flip it around, and I'll share then another story where sometimes going through that process or having a side of lifting revealed to you can be very important. And it can be something that a mentor teaches you, a fellow lifter. And sometimes getting to that place is very important. And other times you can have a whole new world open up before you where, as someone that it's no problem to go to RPE 10. Like, I actually like that. Like, I like competing before and doing all those things. If I want to go fast, if I want to sprint, I'm sprinting as fast as I can. So in lifting, sometimes that doesn't serve you, though. And I think maybe the biggest, let's say, change that I had to my training was in 2012. Where before that, Eric, so we're speaking about deadlifts, all the heavy lifts, because of course we love to lift heavy. Why not? I'd been stuck on the deadlift for quite some time at around 4 plates and change. So I would do like a set of 5 at maybe 405 or maybe 415. Maybe I could do 3 reps of 420, but I would stall out there, and I would basically week to week work up to a 3 or 5 rep max, and I would inevitably be stuck there. And again, the concept of applying myself was no trouble whatsoever. Where in that same time, I met someone. I met this woman at a wedding in end of 2011. That when I was describing some of my goals, said, "Oh, you got to go to the gym for his fitness." The guy there, he's all about strength training. She said he does good mornings, and that's kind of one of those assessment things. I'm like, "Oh, good mornings. Okay, this guy's real." Someone's like, "Yeah, he benches and he does deadlifts." I'm like, "Okay, like some athletes do that too." As soon as she said the phrase "good mornings," I'm like, mental note, check it out. And at the time, the gym I was training at when I was doing the deadlifts, I wasn't slamming it excessively or anything, but the gym was on the second floor, and below it was a drugstore. And so the gym was quite aware of the fact that, you're not doing the machines. Like, yeah, we want everyone to come here, but not you. Like, you doing the deadlifts, that's not good. I put mats underneath. I was using straps, which I don't really like using, trying to control the negative, all those things. And so it wasn't the most conducive environment for my goals. But I go there when I walk into the gym. Sean lets me in. Sean's the owner of Fortis. He's doing actually a set of good mornings because he was just on that block. And Sean was very welcoming. He has a very positive attitude. There's so many positive qualities I could say about Sean overall. But one of the things when I explain my goal and when I would train at the time, it would be essentially an empty gym because Sean had many businesses before, and I won't share too many details about him, personal details that I don't know if he'd want me to share, but he opened the gym as a personal project, something that he enjoyed doing, where he had done a lot of things. He just wanted to open something that he personally could be emotionally invested in. So he wasn't really tied to the success of the gym. All that to say that the gym, typically when I'd go at noon or 1 or 2 p.m., it would be myself, it would be Sean, maybe one other person, and then when my brother joined, it'd be my brother as well. So it'd just be 3 of us training. And I explained some of my goals, and we went over the training routine, and I was dumbfounded at the deadlift because I thought, I'm trying real hard. Like, Sean, every single week I'm working up to a max, like a set of 3 or a set of 5, and I've stalled out for several months. And he said, okay, cool. Like I see the intensity and whatnot. Let's try a program. Have you ever done a periodized program? He said. And I said, I think, yeah, like where you will work down and work up. I think so. He said, try this with me. He said, in any event, because Sean always wants to PR. So it's cool. He said, try this. Next Monday, we'll start a program, you and myself together, a program I've heard good things about, a linear periodization program, the Ed Cohn Felipe program, which is not Ed Cohen, it's true, did not write that
Nope.
program. Just a basic kind of a peaking program, nothing fancy to it. But try that instead. We'll do it together. Cool. Okay, so I show up on Monday, and when we enter the numbers at the time, so this is insane. This just shows we're dialing it back because I'm the person again. And if it's like Omar, I want you to go until you can't do another rep. I will be shaking to the point I've held reps for 8 seconds on the concentric where I'm just stalled out. That's no problem. I'll do it. No questions asked.
Does my
Yeah.
memory serve
Yeah.
me that the Cone Felipe named
Yeah.
program, it was, I think you do some deadlifting, and there'd be a circuit
Yes.
where you
Yes.
would do bent over rows and stiff leg deadlifts?
Yes,
Is that what it was?
Precise. That is precisely. So good morning, Eric. It was good mornings, bent over rows, and stiff leg deadlift. So you do your main deadlift movement, and then you do the accessory movements done in a superset. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So classic program. But at the start of the program, Eric, you're supposed to enter what your max is estimated. And so I'm thinking, okay, my best set's like, 410 or whatever for a set of 5. I'll enter. I think I entered my current deadlift number was 470 for one rep max of 475, which I doubt in any way, shape, or form if I attempted. I don't think I would have got 445, honestly, but I entered 475.
Oof.
And then you had to enter a goal amount that you wanted to hit. So I entered 505, right? Or 500, sorry, 500 pounds. So,
Of course.
yeah. So I'm going to go for 500 pounds, a 25-pound jump. I've never done a one rep max before. I'm likely estimating 20 or 30 pounds more. Anyways, Sean, we get back to the basics where Sean's like, okay, what I think will be very important for this, speed on the movement. And I understood that intuitively. Where before, kind of that negative, let's say, referral pattern of me getting hyped up for a lift, knowing it's going to be grindy and then it being grindier before, even with that overestimated one rep max, and we're using just a regular bar, there's no deadlift bars that we're using in this program, blah, blah, blah. It was just a standard bar. It started you out pretty damn light. And so it started you out I think the first week was may have been like 355 pounds. So it may have been like below like 70%, if that, even less than that. So for me, I'm like, oh, we're starting 50 pounds below what I normally work up to. And the first week felt light. And so I did the circuit, I did everything. But it was a lot less volume too, where it was only, let's say it was like 8 total reps, and I was used to doing 15 to 25, right? 15 to 25, and the RPE was at least 9 or above. Like I was lucky if on one of the sets it was RPE 9. And so I do the program, and bit by bit, every week, it's going up 15 pounds. So 355, 370, 385, 400, 415, all those things. And every single week, I remember by week 4 or 5, I was tackling, I think, 435 for triples. I'd never done that before. And lo and behold, because I had reps in reserve every single week, I was making sure I was getting my sleep. I was focusing. It was a few reps in my mind because I was used to doing sets of 5. I'm like, oh, a double of 440? Yeah, I could do this. And so there's a combination of being naive, belief in the program, having a needed deload essentially in the first few weeks that I wasn't even aware of how. I won't say overtrained, but let's just say I was training at too high of an RP on a consistent basis. And that naive aspect where if you were to tell an outsider, okay, he's a early intermediate lifter, he basically wants to increase his deadlift by 70 pounds in 12 weeks. That's not a good idea. I did it. So I followed Sean and Sean's belief because Sean demonstrated a thorough understanding of knowledge that was well beyond what I knew at the time. So I had complete belief in the program. So I think there's a few key elements there. Right training environment, training with some reps in reserve early on. So I was fresh actually to the session, having lower total volume being done in every single individual workout, and then belief in the program. Well, I didn't think I was going to deadlift 500 pounds. I was going to deadlift 500 pounds. Anyways, we fast forward, and then I forget when, on week whatever, Sean's like, for 480, he's like, you could throw on a belt for this because you have to do like 480 for 2. Threw on a belt, did it no problem. Come test day, I actually not only did 500, I did 510, and then I did 520. So in 12 weeks, and I did wear a belt, and a belt is a difference, but I did like the week after, I did 490 no belt, and I felt like I could have done a double or a triple of that. So we went from a questionable single. Like I'm saying questionable at 440 because like the first rep, and this is the secret that I didn't say, my 4 or 5 sets, I would touch and go at Eric after a while. Like you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Maybe the first 2 reps
Yeah.
I reset and then rep 3, 4, 5. I'm maximal velocity. I'm hitting the ground to get a little bit of that kinetic bounce. So it was a questionable 440, but it went up 55 or 60 pounds. And that changed the game for me because I understood at that point immediately if I don't train at a RPE 10 every single session, I could likely make better progress. And then within a year, yeah, it went from like maybe I was doing shitty reps of 4 or 5 to like I did on a stiff bar, on a very stiff bar actually with no knurling, 545 and all those things. So it was my whole paradigm was shifted for the better, and I have an environment to thank for that, an individual that knew more than me, and all those things coalescing together to form that perfect environment. And that was something that showed to me that there was still a lot more room left to grow. Because as you said, Eric, like, oh, 4 or 5 in 2006, like, is this guy on creatine? I was thinking a 500-pound deadlift was a lifetime goal. And then I just, within 12 weeks, accomplished it and more. I'm like, well, maybe I should start setting my sights a little bit higher. So it's wonderful, the whole lifting journey. And sometimes, as you said, the rocks that you think you've turned over, you haven't been looking on the right beach, you know?
Absolutely. I also found myself with the deadlift on the wrong beach for many years. So I was mentioning how there was that push pull I did in 2006. It was my first competitive lifting thing, an unsanctioned push pull. You actually got as many attempts as you wanted. It was fun. And I deadlifted 495. So I'd been training since mid 2004, and this was mid 2006. So 2 years in, I hit 495. So of course, I had delusions of grandeur that I would be deadlifting, well into the 600 pounds in a year later, because that's how quickly my deadlift went up. And the only way, and okay, here's just to give you an idea of my training style at that time. I think the organization was pretty good. My technique wasn't that bad. I had a few things going for me. Because I had some good mentorship early on, but I also had this kind of intensity is everything kind of mindset. And I remember specifically having a discussion with one of my workout partners at the time, Adam, where anytime one of us would be away and we had to train alone, we basically thought that the training was not going to be good or wouldn't even be stimulative. It would basically be like a deload because we couldn't do forced reps. Because the only way that we saw you could make progress, because we just did it from the start, was that we would do everything to failure and then get a couple more because we had to, train to your capacity and go on. Like my whole conception of progressive overload was doing more than I can actually do. By the way, that's not how progressive overload works. But and I only understood that from literally doing forced reps on everything. So it wasn't a question of RPE 10. It was a question of how far past RPE 10 did I go 5 days per week to 6 days per week. So to give you, and I think this is probably ensuring that the effort was there and having some decent organization resulted in me hitting a 495 deadlift after 2 years of training. But I didn't hit a 500-pound deadlift, correct? A 5-pound increase, the smallest increase you can make that microloading, until a powerlifting meet I did in February 2009. So as an intermediate stage lifter, 2009 would have been my 5th year of lifting, or at that time like 4.5. To have only made a 5-pound increase in your deadlift over a 2.5-year period, because it was a February 2009 meet versus an August 2006 meet, that's not good. And I remember the moment, because 500 pounds was this. Like I just couldn't hit it. I'd been stuck in the 480s to 490s and just bouncing around there and hurting my back repeatedly over and over during this period, because I only trained deadlifts to failure pretty much. And that was really beating me up. And it got me to, like, I fast-tracked intermediate, and then I got stuck. And what changed for me, and I'm not saying that the 500-pound deadlift was a change. That was basically just a good day, like a taper, What changed for me when I hit in 2011 or 12, I hit a 540 deadlift, was that I also changed the way I started training. I started, I wasn't just a bodybuilder training with the bodybuilding mentality of going to failure on everything of that era, who was using powerlifting programs, which was kind of like a really rough mix. Basically just going to failure on heavy compound lifts. And instead, I actually started looking at some of the West Side stuff. And I'd say, to my credit, this is also around the time I started getting educated, I didn't just go hook, line, and sinker. I understood specificity was important. And I created West Side-ish templates, where I'd have like this 3-week cycle. where the first week I would do like either a triple, a double, or a single. It's something that was submaximal but still heavy. The next week I would try to do an equal PR, and then the third week I would try to make an incremental PR, and then I would switch the maximum effort exercise. So basically it was like every other 3-week period I would go for a main lift PR at the end of the cycle. So, and then I'd swap between the DE, which I did a little heavier, so it's kind of like repeated effort really more than dynamic effort. Not a whole lot of bands and chains, not a whole lot of box squats, things that I didn't think made sense for a raw lifter. But I'd go 3 weeks working on the deadlift, and then it would become the dynamic effort work or repeated effort work, 3 weeks working on the squat, and then I'd repeat it. So that was a lot more reasonable in that now every 6 weeks or so, I was trying to hit a PR on a new lift. And lo and behold, with only having 1 week where I was going to an RP 10, I went into a meet and I deadlifted 540, and I had a little bit left in the tank. So it was, I had basically made 8 times the progress in the prior 3 years and the 3 years after that, purely from getting exposure to, like you said, a new beach. And here's the little funny story just to show how egotistical and moronical you are. When I hit that 500-pound deadlift, and there's a lot of emotions going on at the time. This is actually a meet that I'd signed up for. It's literally the day after my father had passed away. So it's very emotional. That was probably played into it. But 500 pounds was such a milestone that I've been working on for so long. When I locked it out and got the down command, I didn't just go down. I slammed the bar into the ground as hard as I could. And what you don't know is then the bar bounces back and reverberates into your hand. And I had a bruised hand and pain in my hand. I think I actually bruised like the bone in my hand for 6 months.
Oh, man.
My hand hurt for 6 months and I had to use straps. And it was, I just keep thinking back, like, why can't I just let the bar down? And I screamed, of course, like some kind of weird, adolescent ape, like the wavering voice, like the, it was good. It was good times.
I got it.
100%.
Well, Eric, I do think there is that experience gap, and maybe that's what we're trying to highlight in this episode too, where you could know what you should be doing, but as you said, there's many different participants on your bus, right? You're not just Keanu Reeves, there's not just Sandra Bullock. There might be other individuals, okay, that have a not necessarily a malicious intent, but you have to choose who you listen to, and that gap that happens, there's the humble pie that will tend to be served to you inevitably in your lifting career, and if you lift long enough, and if you keep making progress, there's a higher likelihood that you've gone through some of these things, these blocks. It's almost like a Fermi's paradox, where they say there's certain maybe thresholds that have to occur, conditions before you can reach intelligent life, or so on and so forth. So maybe there's gates that occur, and these gates prevent, the likelihood of intelligent life populating around the universe. Cool. But for us, it's kind of the same.
Or at least those that use radio signals.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another issue with Fermi's paradox, not to get off on a tangent, but go ahead.
Yeah. The idea is, with ourselves and what we're trying to do here, when we're lifting, when we're trying to make progress, we think to ourselves, okay, no, you know what? I'm the guy. I know exactly what I'm doing. This is, how do we say? This is a method that I'm attempting to do, that there are no chinks in the armor. There's nothing negative. There are no consequences to my actions other than complete gains. Me swallowing my protein shake, that just makes sense. I mean, me training until I have no good reps left in the tank on a daily/weekly basis, this is exactly what I need to do. And then you kind of sit back, you think to yourself, wow, I'm not making progress here. This guy's making a lot of progress. What's going on? Okay, well, is it me? Is it just my effort? And you have that voice in the back of your head, like, am I just not giving enough effort? I'm like, I don't know if it's that. And so I think there's a necessary experience that lifters need to go through in order to become a better lifter, right? I think you can say, Eric, and I don't know if you would agree with that, the simple fact that for individuals, when you go through all these things, that if you listen and you just kind of set aside the ego for just a moment and you listen, you will emerge, as you said at the start of the podcast, as a better lifter.
No, I totally agree. I think it's that classic and cliche saying, and I've said it before, that to the person with a hammer, the whole world's problems are a nail.
Yeah.
And that, like, if you don't do anything to kind of level up your understanding, and if you are so attached to perhaps an ego-driven understanding of what progress means, or progressive overload means, or programming means, or anything that is really only increased leveling up of masochism or effort, if that's the only stone you have to turn over, you're probably going to end up trying to roll over a boulder that's just going to hurt you. And if you do roll it over, it's just going to smash your foot, you know? And exactly like you said, you're on the wrong beach. Like, it's not to say that this beach isn't important, but you've built a mansion on this thing. You've been swimming here forever. You've fished it out. You've got algae all over your body. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know how accurate the marine biologists are going to find this analogy, but the point is you've thoroughly explored and done everything you can on this beach, and that's great. So the answer is no. I don't need to do more effort. I don't need to quadruple down at this point on effort, because that's netted me a 5-pound PR over 3 years. Maybe, just maybe, try something else, considering you've also hurt your back 3 times and switched to sumo just because conventional hurts too much. I mean, that's a personal, that might be a little too personal of my specific story, but that was quite literally the experience for me. Is I had to get to a certain point where I was like, okay, this is not the path forward. This path, I've been running into this wall for 3 years, and I made a little bit of progress. And yeah, I knocked some a bit off that wall, but I also knocked my own teeth out a few times. And I think that pivotal moment, even though you could contain it just to that one experience, like that was an eye opener for me, that maybe training to failure all the time wasn't the answer. That just pure effort wasn't the answer. But you know, I had a similar experience with my bench in my very first comp, and I don't think we had like long pauses, and it was much more like it's a touch and go. I hit a 320 bench, and it wouldn't have been until 2010, so 4 years later, where I hit a 325 with a true comp pause at a heavier body weight. So basically my bench went nowhere for 4 years. And when I've actually done now a 150 kilo, 331 paused at like a 9 RPE, just because I had never done it in comp before. This is back in 2016. I blew away my old PR, and I was like, shit, I should have gone for more. But I just hadn't done it on meet day, 150. I didn't want to miss it. Yep. And I've actually done a 165 or 363 touch and go at the same body weight that I had struggled to hit a pause 325. And the difference between those a rapid ascent to a pretty good intermediate bench of 325 and then completely just hitting the pause, or 320 and then hitting the pause except for those 5 pounds for 4 years. The answer there wasn't back off my RPE. The answer was actually try new structures of training. Because even though I got exposed to Westside and then even Shaiko, I couldn't find anything at the time in the powerlifting world where you were benching more than 3 times per week. That just wasn't done. It didn't matter which paradigm of thought you were in. And it truly, for me, just reminded myself that I was like, you know what? When I got away from training to failure on the deadlift, I made some progress. I've turned over almost every stone. Now at least I'm aware that there are other beaches. What's going to be the change for me for my bench press? You know what? I've done a lot of volume. I've gone to failure. I've done rotating different exercise variants. I've done close group. I've done wide group. I've done chains. I've done bands. I have done incline. I have done overhead press because I read some old school articles saying that was the best pressing movement. I've done everything I can in the context of not doing more than 3 times per week benching. So I went to 4, 5, even 6 times per week benching, and that's really all of a sudden I made more progress than I had in the last 4 years. And it was like another reminder that I've only experienced what I've experienced. Perhaps I should stay open. And I think those are the things that you would definitely miss if you're looking for what's optimal. Because the problem with looking for an answer is that you'll find it.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for an answer that may not be the only answer, or if your whole paradigm of thinking is that there is the answer instead of many answers depending on many contexts, and this I think very much comes into play with the experiential side of it. If you've been in the community, if you've been around the world, this is one of the reasons why I'm really thankful that I've trained with Olympic lifters, I've trained with strongmen and strongwomen, I've trained with enhanced folks, I've trained with natural folks, I've trained with folks who started competing in the 90s, I've trained with folks who started competing last week, I've trained with people in their 50s and 60s, people in their teens, on every discipline of lifting you can think of, is that each one of these communities starts to have a shared experience. And that's good and bad, because you can share that experience, you can have community, you can learn from other people, but at the same time, it becomes siloed. And you start to think in certain paradigms. Like an Olympic lifter, if they just transposed their way of thinking onto powerlifting, would have gone to the idea of benching more frequently way earlier. These guys are doing 10 sessions a week, you know? Likewise, if I had started in the powerlifting community instead of kind of like the bodybuilding community who does the power lifts, I would have understood very early on that training to failure all the time just simply wasn't done. That's what you do on your third or second attempts, depending on your paradigm of thinking. And that the idea of a training max wasn't even something in my head, that you enter a max that's 90%. So I think all of those concepts, I only got exposed to them because I started having that experience. I wasn't online in my community looking for just simply that one true answer to my quote unquote problem, but rather I was acknowledging that, hey, people have been solving different variations of the same problem in all these communities, and maybe I should just go out and live amongst these communities and see what they've learned, so I can broaden my awareness of not just which stones to turn over, but how many beaches are there?
More than one. And let me just say, Eric, you know what I like that you said just now?
I don't.
The
I'm assuming everything, but you can go ahead and give me the highlights.
The high frequency on that bench, bro, because we're talking 4 times a week. Big fan, okay? This guy right here, high frequency benching all the way. No, I think I like what you said when you said if you're looking for an answer, eventually you will find one. And I think sometimes with all of us, when we're lifting, we think, we're thinking of the variables. Okay, what are we doing? How can we do this better? And we have these assumptions about some of the things that we're currently doing that they're givens. As you said, like, so my training max, I don't have a training max. Like, no, it's 100%. Like, when you input a percentage in the program, this is one of my assumptions. And when you start questioning some of those things, slowly eroding that which you think you truly know, and then coming with a fresh slate. And sometimes that's why I personally like to do this process. And I do it every few years where I'll start tweaking one of my main lifts, not in a crazy way, but I went through a recent block where on the deadlift, I chose a little bit more of a narrow stance. Why? Because I wanted to try and have my hands a little bit closer. And I thought to myself, I know the position. I've been playing around on the deadlift for quite some time, but let me just try this out. And then by the end of that, I did make the conclusion, you know what, my traditional stance is better. But sometimes, like a high bar squat, I moved over the high bar squat and I haven't looked back. I do want to say one thing though, Eric, because that's why I was hesitating and pausing after you said it, but I have to make the recommendation because I mentioned Fermi's paradox and you talked about radio signals. I know you read sci-fi. Have you ever read any Stanislaw Lem?
I don't think so. Do you know any of the titles of his works?
Yeah. Solaris. Yeah, so big fan. So the one that I would recommend for everyone would be HMV, His Master's Voice, where he deals exactly with that, with neutrino signals. And what I like about him, he's hard science fiction, so it's not wishy-washy. It's with a very solid base. And it's actually a meta-commentary for everyone that's interested about science fiction as a whole and how it's really more of a reflection of our times and our assumptions than anything that could be possible in terms of extrapolating into the future. But he's at the pinnacle, at the tippity top. There's a reason why Andrei Tarkovsky adapted Solaris and made that into a film. I have to make the recommendation. I was trying to stay on topic, Eric, when you said that, and that's why I was paused. I'm like, I gotta say it. I just gotta say it before we go on. Yeah,
ain't nothing wrong with that. And I have seen Solaris, which I thought was actually a really good movie. And do you think it held up, or is it different from the book, or is it just be seen? Is it one of those times where they're both good, but they should stand on their own too, or is one a good reflection of the other?
I would say they stand on their own. In the comparison, I would say it's almost like Stanley Kubrick, for those that are cinephiles, when he adapted The Shining, where I'd say there's definitely but I would say Stanislaw Lem is a much better writer than Stephen King. Like there's a quote on, I'm blanking on
Stephen King has leveled up over time, I will say.
Yeah,
he's improved.
I like some of his prose. I'm just like, if you're going up against the titans of literature, it's like, you got to know your play. Like, we talk kind of, Eric, like, pop culture. Like, we talk about the Avengers. Are we going to compare the Avengers to Seven Samurai? Like, as Martin Scorsese said, it's like, he said, I don't consider those cinema. And people were like, oh, that's a loaded statement. I'm like, I think he could defend himself, and I understand kind of what he's saying. I would say it's kind of like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and then Stephen King's book, The Shining, where they're different aspects of a similar whole. But, I swing hard for Tarkovsky. The way I would actually say about Solaris, because it's popular here in the West, because it's more sci-fi. If you like Solaris, or if you like any of Tarkovsky's works, in my personal opinion, I would say he's released 7 films. They're all masterpieces. And Solaris is, in my opinion, at the bottom tier, and it's still a masterpiece. Like, that's how good he is. Like, in the West here, so it's kind of like, and this is a tangent, we'll go right back to the topic, but where I remember I made the recommendation, Rashomon, for Akira Kurosawa, to check it out, where it's because the untrustworthy narrator for the postmodernist perspective, it could be very, I'd say, something that people would find relatable here in the West. So they're like, oh, like, yeah, I'll check out more of his stuff. It's like, Is that necessarily one of his best works? It's up there, but same idea as Solaris. If you like Solaris, some of his other works, there's almost a mystical, poetic element to them. There's so many things to them. Intense philosophical arguments, like in Stalker, that are just fantastic. Yeah, if you had any enjoyment of Solaris, keep going. Is all I'd say, and that's my final
Cool.
statement, Eric, on that.
Cultural gateway cinema. It would be Solaris, and then you could try other stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that tangent by myself and Omar. Now we're going to carry on with the qualitative experiential side of lifting.
It's just what we do, and I think probably we should have the final experience that we give now, just to keep it, because it's like a taster's treat. Because we could go on. When I said before we went on, Eric, I said, Eric, you have stories, right? Because I said I've been thinking of a few things. We proposed this idea, we agreed on it. I've already been thinking. I have a bunch, and you're like, oh man, I have so many, I could tell. And I think each one has been, we spoke a little bit about nutrition, we spoke about the ego, we spoke about understanding that we thought we were at a limit, and then you could go beyond the limit. One that I want to talk about, because it's near and dear to me now over the last few years, would probably be overcoming some adversity. And I should give the context when we say adversity. I'm not talking, true life adversity where crazy things are happening. There's a war going on, can't even make it to the gym. It reminds me, there's someone that sent a DM to Kaizen training where the coronavirus is in full swing in South Korea. And he was being dead serious, where he said, my gym has been shut down and my town's been quarantined. I'm on your program right now. I'm on week 13. It's a peaking program. Week 16, I was going to test. And now it looks like I won't be able to go to the gym for the next 2 weeks. What should I do? I was like, oh man, like this is not a consideration we have to go through, where it's basically, Eric, it's impossible to train now. You can't. Like, you're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least not with what he's been training with. I mean, there's some badass bodyweight stuff you can do, but we're not going to find out what your deadlift 1RM is.
Yeah, so
unfortunately.
Eric, so if I do 100 air squats, what would that roughly translate to my deadlift? I'm like, I don't know.
It's a PR.
You did well.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So what I'd say, one of the lifts that I'm proud of, or one of the experiences that I went through recently, was coming back at that time period when you first visited in Toronto, where I thought it was like a hernia, it was like a sports hernia, whatever. Well, I took a long time off from doing squats. And so I came from a place where I'd been squatting for a while, and I achieved a certain threshold where I was always well within my 1 rep max, which was 500 pounds. I was within striking distance of that. And so I was just kind of coasting, maintaining while focusing on other things. Cool. And then I hadn't been able to squat for months and months due to that setback. And I had found it discouraging, where every time I'd try and rev it up, it would get worse the area, right? So I'd try different stance widths, I would try different depth levels, I would try different frequency amounts. So there's a period basically of 6 months of just constantly regressing, and that reservoir of strength I'd built up, it was slowly eroding, because now after 6 to 7 months of not being able to squat more than one time a week, and even that, I was working up to 50 or 60% without discomfort, it was frustrating. And what I was happy with was the tenacity of deciding not to give up and trying to find some workarounds in order to make it happen. Not in a way, once again, because there is a time and place for everything. I've been guilty. I've been that person. And that's why it's like, oh, like this hurts or whatever. Just not only work through it, like ignore it to the point that it starts compounding. Another thing happens. Before you know it, you're kind of a wreck. And it's not all in your head. It's one of those things where you have to know when to push and when to pull back. And I've been guilty of pushing, as we've kind of been talking about, more than pulling back. So this time I decided to pull back, and I was trying to frame things, try out different things. And then eventually it kind of sorted itself out, which is what tends to happen. Things started to feel slowly better, but the confidence under the barbell, where you know that, Eric, where it happens with one particular lift, where you go from knowing that the lift is going to move, you can work up to 70% or 80% reliably, to like, I don't know if this thing's going to set off, right? Where it gets aggravated, and all of a sudden you have to change everything about that training session, and then that directly impacts next week, and so on and so forth. So, not trying to catastrophize things, but also understand that there's so much uncertainty in the future of my training that it made the entire process contain so much doubt that it wasn't fun, right? Going to the sessions, like, I'm going to try and do what I can do, but I can't really extrapolate into the future beyond a few weeks. So I'm kind of in the dark, to use that Mike Teixeira example, that analogy where he's talking about things, where you're trying to sift through things. But my pen light, Eric, it's not only flickering, it's oftentimes it's just fluttering out, and I got nothing. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to stay here for a second rather than move and hope that light turns on again. But I think sometimes just sticking with the intention, and the intention was to always come back, working around, trying things out. Oh, this didn't work. Let me adjust. Like, here's some feedback. Cool, whatever. And it was a 6 to 7 month process. And in that time, I think, honestly, giving the body time just to rest and recover and reset everything, and some of those pathways where you associate some of the pain, cool, whatever, coming back, everything felt terrible. Like I can't remember the last time the squatting 315 felt like a struggle. You know what I mean? So it's a humbling experience where it's like I can work up to X always. Like on deadlifts, like 405 for reps has never been a problem. It's like, but now I'm down to 3 plates and like I'm lifting the weight and I'm feeling it. And so it took a while, but I could say that probably was an experience where that stubbornness, but also with some of the restraint I learned over time, was what proved to be successful. And it showed that, the whole concept, and, shout out to barbell medicine when they talk about not trying to catastrophize things. And I do get that idea where you think to yourself, as we joke about, like, oh, I got 6 months until I got to compete, or I have X amount of time before this specific goal. It's all going downhill now because if I don't hit this, that means that the next week I'm not going to hit that. And it's kind of like a domino effect. And so letting things resolve itself under its own time. And then shortly things started getting better. I surrounded myself with a positive kind of group of individuals. I went down, I trained in LA. I trained with Alan, I trained with Mike. And that session was on the comeback session before the PR, the high bar where I hit 495 on that day. Is that we did a 405 max out. And what felt so good going for that max out is that I'd built up enough momentum. I think we talk about intention in this podcast. I think momentum's another one. So confidence, building confidence, where if you have 10 weeks consistently of training actually going well, and there's no flare-ups, there's nothing going wrong. I've seen Mike Teixeira now, he's posting about his training in that process where you build that momentum. And so it felt amazing, the exhilaration of having the patience to see it through, and then being given kind of the green light. It's like, oh, I'm going to max out now on 405. Man, this is what I've been wanting to do for so long. And then hitting a nice little PR on that. Shout out to doing it as Stevie Wonder, living in the city. Just fantastic. Was something really cool. So I'd say having patience, or trying. So it only took a decade, Eric, but cultivating that patience. And it's in ways, I'm joking when I say this, but I say cultivating the patience, but it's like I turned over, as we've been saying in this episode, every other rock, and it was the last one left. And I was like, I'll give that one a go. And now it's a permanent rock in my rock pile.
Fine, I have to be patient. Yeah. Which is a really fantastic, thing to have. I mean, you might have been trying to hang a bunch of pictures, and you had a tool belt that included a saw, and screwdrivers and everything except the hammer you need to hammer those nails. But eventually you got the hammer, and it was the most important tool, even if it came last. And I think it's understandable that it came last because of the mentality that you brought to it. And as much as we can kind of bag on ourselves about like, oh, we worked so hard and we're, I would say, purposely and willfully unaware of some of our internal signals to the point where we could push past those barriers, it wasn't just a bad thing. There's a double-edged sword there. It probably allowed us to get success. And I think my last story that I'll share is kind of two different ways in which, and you'll appreciate this, that fear was the mind killer for me. Okay, so I think at a certain point in my career, I started to be able to interpret and read science and apply it to my training, but I started to use science inappropriately. I started to use science as a safety blanket. And what I mean by that is that since we can't truly know what is optimal or what's the best thing to do, we can only know, is it working right now? Is it working satisfactorily? And is it worth it for me to try other things? And what other stones have I unturned? And what happens? And then adjust over time. I wanted to feel like I was doing something I was confident in and that was quote unquote optimal because it was science based. And in my, I think, 2011 contest prep, I didn't feel that there was sufficient data to support the idea of refeeds being game changers. And nonetheless, though, I kept seeing that from all the prior data I had, the little experimentations, that I would break plateaus when I increased my calories. Looking back, I know that I was just putting way too much stress on myself during my diet, doing things like HIIT, along with probably too much training to failure, too much volume, probably retaining a bunch of water and then eating and dropping it and being able to see progress that was there regardless. So it really just smoothed out my signals, and then I wouldn't overcut my calories. But I really had to struggle and convince myself to actually try this whole refeed strategy that I saw worked when I experimented in the off season, just because the science wasn't there yet to back it. And the realization for me was that I was using science as a safety blanket. I was being fear-based and clinging to something that in reality, philosophically, is all based upon probabilities, our best guess, and honestly, it does not provide big T truth. It's just supposed to get us a little closer and in the realm of understanding something. And because I hadn't aligned myself with that philosophy, I let fear creep in, and it actually prevented me from taking an action earlier that I knew probably would have been successful. But credit to myself, I actually did implement it. So I think many times we just have to appropriately be self-aware. And like if we look at some of the data on intuitive eating, and there's a big pushback in the evidence-based community of intuitive eating being good or bad, or even understanding what it is. But one of the interesting lines of research is that people who score well on on intuitive eating, that means they have good awareness, they have better what's called interoceptive awareness, and that's often measured by how aware of you or of your heart rate. And I'm not a huge expert in this data, so I don't want to misquote it, but some of the folks who are really poor at intuitive eating just don't have good internal body awareness. Meaning, like, if you were to actually ask them, hey, what do you think your heart rate is now, compared to someone who does have good interoceptive awareness, they wouldn't be as accurate. And this seems to come either by personality trait or from literally training yourself to ignore body signals. Like you were talking about, when you would feel pain, you would just purposely train through it. You would ignore it and just move forward. And I think that's a double-edged sword, because we know that, whether you're in a little bit of pain right now or things feel creaky is not necessarily going to predict injury, but it's certainly not a good idea just to put your head in the sand, to use another analogy I've used previously, like an ostrich, and to ignore it and move forward. There is data to be gained there. There's an internal awareness to be gained. And I had a neck injury in 2018, or it might have been, it happened throughout the course of 2018, which actually delayed when I was going to do my contest prep, and that's why it was 2019. And I was, if anyone who saw me training at the 2018 UEBC, I was doing a whole bunch of weird, like one-arm cable stuff, because there was a 2 or 3 month period where I had about 50% of the strength in my right arm for a while, because I had this flare up in my neck injury. It caused neurological symptoms, and I had pain in my arm for almost 3 months, and I was going to get surgery. And I had imaging, and I knew that I had like nerve compression and a few slipped discs in my neck. And I had catastrophized about this. I told a lot of stories about what that meant, what my future looked like. I thought I'd never be able to Olympic lift again. Overhead work was something I had to step away from. And I consigned myself to doing, bodybuilding and maybe powerlifting, because I had never had an issue with benching, squatting, or deadlifting. And there was a lot of catastrophizing around that. And to my credit, again, talking about fear being the mind killer, is that I started to take on board some of the things, like you said, the barbell medicine crew and anyone who's really up to date with modern pain science has expressed that, whether you're symptomatic, asymptomatic, and whether you are showing signs on radiology or whether you're actually experiencing decrements in pain, like I had a legitimate issue. However, it resolved itself. And it almost doesn't necessarily matter what my injury risk is in my neck or to what degree I'm actually having quote unquote tissue damage. The reality is I can do what I can do, and I can be self-aware, and I can make, small incremental jumps. And I eventually did come back to Olympic lifting over, about a year and a half later. And I'm now into the realm of hitting PRs on Olympic lifting while also doing strongman work and hitting overhead work PRs there as well. And there was a point where I thought, better safe than sorry. I'm just never going to put anything over my head again. And I think and previously I only would have had 2 options: to, yes, cut that off, amputate that possibility in life, tell the story and catastrophize, but be like, you know what, better safe than sorry, never going to do it. Or ignore the reality and just push ahead full steam. But instead what I did is I took a very, very gradual approach to building back up. I was aware. I would use it as going, maybe I'm a little too fatigued. If I didn't have a lot of sleep, I would err on the conservative side. And I used a lot of my personal self-awareness that I had cultivated from not just ignoring these signals anymore and just pushing ahead, and making a plan to have an auto-regulated approach towards graded exposure. And I'm not saying I'm not going to get hurt, but I'm saying I'm doing way more than I thought was possible 2 years ago.
No, Eric, it's fantastic. I remember in 2018, we went out to a place to eat. Barrow was a place. And I said, Eric, I don't like how those people are looking at us. My friend, it might be time to rumble. And you said, Omar, I have your back. Thing is, if I get one punch to this neck, I'm done. So just understand that I got your back, but I might not be a big help. And I said, noted, noted. And I remember that because we were just sharing different things. I think anyone whether you've been lifting for a long time or not, those things happen, right? And you do face kind of that dark tunnel where you're thinking to yourself, like, is this it for me? As you said, like you consign yourself, you thought, okay, so looks like I won't be able to make progress in that. It would make much more sense to do A, B, C. And then sometimes as things either resolve themselves on their own, or you find new pathways, or you just reframe things in a different way, man, it opens doors that you shut on yourself. And so I love to hear that, man. That's why you will see, well, not they, but you being Eric, will see, like, I see you posting training videos of this, that. I'm like, I give the heart eye emoji on Instagram. I give the clap. I go that you got this. I'm like, I love to see. I love I love me a good comeback. Okay, and I'm not going to call it a comeback, but I just like seeing the tenacity, but with the self awareness. So it's not like Eric. It's like, oh, my neck feels good. Time to grind it out every single week. It's like, okay, like I want to be in this. I think what we could both agree now, maybe one of the final lessons is that we want to be in this for a long time. So that's one of our givens. Like that's one of our statements where it's an absolute, it's not like, I could train this if it means I will PR and I will be the best lifter, but it will be detrimental or have long-term consequences for my quality of life as a lifter. It's like I'm actually not going to do that. I'm looking at that long-term outcome, and we're both kind of on the same page for that. We're stuck, as you say, we're stuck together. We're stuck lifting, and so all our choices from there.
Yep. I think, I made a Dune reference. You made also another classic reference to the great film Stuck Together.
Yep.
We talked about, some classic sci-fi writers. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you were just to take the smorgasbord of art that we'd applied here,
Yeah.
you'll get some of these exposure to these experiences and you'll learn some things. So I just hope this has been a beneficial learning experience of art and science and maybe even history, at least of Omar and myself's own personal history.
Yeah, it's a history of some sort, okay? And all his history is written by the victors, as we know, and we are the victors. So here we are, standing and sitting before you to tell you the tales that came before you so that we can light the way for those that are to follow. I want to say, Eric, I enjoyed this. I'm just saying if people enjoyed it, maybe leave a comment on YouTube and we will consider in a year or whenever some sort of other Odyssey adjourned, maybe with other people, like we reunite with Alberto or someone else. Or I do think every now and then, from time to time, infrequently, it is fun. Once again, as you said, Eric, when lifters get together, it's not like, oh yeah, doc, tell me about your program. So it's 87.5 you do on week 3, and then you do for an RP now. Okay, and you go down. You kind of trade war stories. It's how you associate and you understand that shared experience that you have together.
That's right. Tell me about how you had trench foot. That's what I need to know.
That's what they need to know. Well, I just want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of The Iron Culture, the only podcast that matters. We don't come up with the slogans, you guys do. So I'm just repeating what people are saying, Eric. It's standard practice.
Yeah, I mean, there are other quote-unquote podcasts out there that may have quote-unquote guests and may talk about quote-unquote science or quote-unquote being stronger. Quote-unquote people named Eric, but they're quote-unquote not as good. So, I mean, and again, we're just repeating what people have said.
Yeah, we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves to any one position, but I think it's just clear if you take a look at the numbers and the comments and what people are saying. They said, they didn't say that we didn't have a chance. They said these guys have a big chance, in fact. So,
yeah, I'm a little disappointed that we're pigeonholed into being number 1, but for now, I think we'll just take it.
It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll, and luckily we're at the top. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. Stay tuned for our upcoming tour series in 2021. We've been teasing it for a while now. If you enjoy listening to these episodes, you can help us out. You can leave a rating review on the old iTunes, Spotify. I don't think you can do that, so just go to iTunes and leave
Just
that.
listen.
Just silently listen, please. And then on YouTube, if you enjoy it, go ahead and leave a like and leave a comment. We'll do our best to respond, and we'll see everyone every single Monday on another episode of Iron Culture. Peace.